Welcome, everybody. This is Steve Hill with New Hydrogen, and I am privileged to have Johannes Schwank with us today. A little bit about Johannes. He holds a PhD in physical chemistry from Innsbruck University in Austria. He joined the University of Michigan faculty in 1980, where he rose through the ranks and became a full professor of chemical engineering in 1990. He served as chairman of the chemical engineering department from 1990 to 1995, as interim director of the University of Michigan Energy Institute in 2011 and 2012, and as director of the Electron Microbeam Analysis Laboratory, a campus-wide user facility from 2013 to 2015. In addition, he holds the James and Judith Street Chair in Chemical Engineering. He's the director of Refresh, an interdisciplinary project that deals with food, energy, and water security in resource-constrained environments, and I'm super excited to talk with you about that today. He serves as the academic director of the Multidisciplinary Design Program. He also developed several new courses, such as Chemical Engineering Economics course, a course focused on gas and oil technology, a course on repurposing waste plastic, and a course on alternative energy technologies taught at a university in Thailand, of which I cannot pronounce. Maybe you can give a better pronunciation of that.
Chulalongkorn.
Chulalongkorn. There we go. So glad to have you here, and such a privilege.
Well, the pleasure is all mine. Thank you, Steve.
Well, one of the things that I was doing and kind of researching for our conversation is you gave a testimony to Congress, congressional testimony way back in 2003. And during that time, you explained the transition to a hydrogen-based economy was imminent. It required substantial advancements in hydrogen technology, significant investments, and a focus on production, storage, distribution, and utilization. So that's 20 years ago now, if you had to give us a grade on how we've made progress, what would you give us?
Well, unfortunately, there has been a number of false starts. Yeah. And I think looking back, we have missed an opportunity. And I think slowly but surely the world is recognizing that we need to get our arms around hydrogen as an energy carrier. And if I'm not mistaken, just in the last few years, about 20 different countries have finally caught on and developed a national hydrogen strategy. So I wish we would have thought about this in 2003. But back then, this was one of those times when there was maybe some exuberance and a little bit of premature excitement about hydrogen fuel cell technology. And unfortunately, it came and went. But nevertheless, in the background, some work has continued, not certainly at the pace that would be required. And when I sort of look back, like what went wrong, there's always a tendency to pick winning and losing strategies. And obviously, our industrial companies have to be careful about resources and how they deploy them. And if I can just pick the example of transportation, our OEMs are caught in an incredible dilemma. On one end, they have combustion vehicles on the market, but are now being more or less dragged into very quickly deploying battery electric vehicles. And when you sort of think about from a corporate standpoint, it's tough to then also keep your eye on the ball and develop what I consider the potential end game for sustainable transportation, namely a hydrogen-based transportation system. But it becomes sort of a tough game to be in all three games at the same time. And unfortunately, the hydrogen vehicles were sort of left behind in all this, primarily for, I think, reasons that deal with economics.
Yeah, definitely. And if you think about, I have a friend, his name is Ivor John, who lives nearby me, and he has he used to have 3 Toyota Mirais, And
Mhm.
he took me to there's a hydrogen refueling station where we live, and he took me and showed me how quickly he could refuel that thing in 4 minutes, I think. Um, and it was a modern, nice looking vehicle. But Toyota has had that kind of split strategy. They can afford to do that. They're one of the world's largest manufacturers, but some of the smaller ones are going to have to decide which side they want to play on. It's a great point. So what
But
do you
there are ambitious plans out there. I mean, California is dreaming of having 100,000 fuel cell vehicles on the road, and they're still investing in building out the infrastructure. But in some places, it went backwards. I remember at the heyday of this early start of hydrogen, we used to have 4 hydrogen refueling stations in our immediate vicinity. So I could drive a fuel cell car all the way from Ann Arbor to Detroit and back. And there were enough stations to make it happen. And unfortunately, they have ceased to exist.
think?
uh,
What you mentioned the false starts, which kind of ties into that. Do you feel like this latest wave of interest in hydrogen is shaping up to be another false start, or do we have something behind us that's going to give us more traction this time?
it's hard to tell. I mean, these kinds of things require, obviously, not just technology pull, but also the government push.
Mm-hmm.
And it remains to be seen how the various governments around the globe respond to the challenge. The way I see it from a just practical perspective, uh, it is going to be difficult to roll out the infrastructure even for the full electric battery vehicles. The reason for this being that if you do a simple mass and energy store balance calculation,
Mm-hmm.
when you look at the current energy content of transportation fuel, gasoline and diesel and jet fuel that's being burned,
Mm-hmm.
there's a certain energy content in there. If you translate the same, if you push this energy content over and require the electric grid to supply it, it will become immediately clear that we are woefully short of capacity. We need to double our electric grid. I don't think most people have fully understood what we are getting ourselves into with this headlong push into battery electric vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, when we think about hydrogen as a sort of end game in this, we do have a very well established liquid fuel distribution, storage, and dispensing infrastructure. It would be much easier, in my opinion, to overlay this with a hydrogen on-site production, either at the gas station level or more centralized. But we could essentially use the existing infrastructure. In addition to this, hydrogen technology lends itself beautifully to renewable energy by using renewable electricity to produce locally hydrogen from electrolysis, which requires, of course, improvement in the electrolyzer technology. But this then really creates a situation where we can go carbon free or carbon neutral. And I just don't see a sort of good mass deployment, global mass deployment of electric vehicles simply because of the limited supply of strategic minerals that are required for battery production. And like I said, worldwide, we don't have enough electricity. So it has to come from somewhere. And so the hydrogen technology seems to me, on the long run, the more reasonable way of transitioning to a less carbon intensive economy. But like I said, the critical issue there is that both these kinds of technology transitions require, by necessity, government subsidies. And right now, the government subsidies are flowing heavily into battery electric vehicles, which makes it very difficult, I think, for producers of fuel cell electric vehicles to justify their investments.
You've mentioned so many things in that statement, from infrastructure, which is sounds like the original question was, how are we progressing towards this, or what kind of obstacles do we have in getting there? Is this another false alarm on hydrogen? And I hear you saying maybe, but and partially because the electric push right now is first and foremost. However, there is a potential to leverage some of the infrastructure we already have in place to accelerate that progress. Is that a pretty good summary?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And also, let's not forget that we also rely on hydrogen very heavily in our chemical industry, like ammonia production, methanol production, and creating now a renewable basis for hydrogen production from solar and wind, and from essentially green electricity that is very much compatible with hydrogen production from water. This then can help decarbonize the chemical industry. So it's a win-win on both sides.
Yeah, and that's what we're hoping for, is that push. I mean, renewables are growing, and the great thing is, as time goes by, we're seeing lower and lower costs for these green sources of electricity, and I believe over time, carbon-based fuels are going to be more and more expensive because they're a limited resource. Yeah. And so we kind of have an ultimatum in place that we need to work towards. But you mentioned something really interesting to me, and maybe you can explain this for those who may be listening and not understand fully. You mentioned ammonia production and hydrogen, and that goes down the path of this refresh program, I think, that you are running at the University of Michigan. Can you give kind of some context and explain to people how all these things fit together?
Yeah, thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about this. The way I see the world unfolding, we have essentially now an opportunity to rethink, to some extent, our most carbon-intensive industries. And in the chemical arena, of course, the production of fertilizer, of ammonia, which is a key ingredient to fertilizer, is not only one of the most energy-intensive industries, it's also the industry that produces the most carbon dioxide emissions by far. It dwarfs any other process. The reason for this is that hydrogen is being produced from natural gas, and in this so-called reforming process, when you turn natural gas into hydrogen, the byproduct that gets emitted is carbon dioxide. There is an alternative, and the alternative is to rethink how we make these fertilizers and maybe deploy them in smaller units, not in these mega plants where the economy of scale dictates larger and larger facilities. But these larger and larger facilities also then require long-distance transportation of fertilizer, and it also creates accessibility issues with under-resourced environments. We are talking in particular, I've worked in this refresh program a lot in African countries. And there you see many farmers who cannot either afford ammonia or cannot get their hands on fertilizer because of the logistics chain that is simply not in place or is not reliable. And so our vision is to, rather than keep expanding the capacity of the large facilities and building more of them, what if we fill in the growing demand that is required to create food security in these regions of the world? What if we fill that in with much smaller scale facilities that operate almost like an appliance and could be operated by a farming consortium, by a cooperative, and essentially giving more control to the local communities, how they fertilize their fields. And in the process, of course, since we are now going small, this opens the door to renewable hydrogen production from water by electrolysis that is driven by solar power. So we are currently developing a completely carbon-free system where the entire ammonia production operates with renewable energy and is essentially zero carbon emissions. And this essentially, but for something like this to work, and this is where this so-called refresh program comes in, there's more to it because this also requires changing of mindsets. It requires a lot of outreach to communities and bringing the communities on board as participants in creating these new infrastructures rather than importing them, dropping them in from the outside. That does not work. And so
It seems like a no-brainer, really,
yeah.
because of the benefits are so huge. What kind of resistance is there that you're kind of referring to about this re-educating or
No,
kind
there's
of
really not. I think the communities we have worked in were enthusiastically embracing our concepts. They really love it, and they would like to have it already in place if we could do it.
Yeah.
And so we recently had actually two teams of business school students going. One went to Rwanda, and the other team we sent to South Africa. And they talked to the various stakeholders. And all I can tell you is, if we had prototypes available, they would buy them today. They were ready to go. They really feel this fills an incredible need. In particular, the blending companies that smaller outfits that in sort of on a regional basis make custom fertilizers for the farms depending on soil analysis and so on. So again, this allows us to be much more responsive to local needs because not every farm needs the same fertilizer, right? And so they can be blended together in these small-scale facilities, almost like custom blends. But standing in the way is, of course, like always, the cost, right? There's a penalty to pay. There's a reason why ammonia plants are as large as they are, and it's hard to compete. Right? But on the other hand, we should not lose sight that the additional benefits that can be derived may offset the sort of bottom line cost analysis to some extent, because very often we do not take things like community health, life expectancy, things like this into consideration. So what do you gain if you have better nutrition, which is facilitated by these local facilities? What is to be gained if now you can employ local manpower and thereby create wealth for a community? So there are a lot of other angles, and we are working, I'm fortunate to have colleagues at our university who are passionate about exploring these things and figuring out how does one really structure something that allows something that on the surface is not competitive with the ammonia price that, say, a big ammonia producer can generate. How can we offset that? And how do you account for that? It's very difficult to do. I mean, we are starting to account a little bit now for the environmental cost of certain technologies. And it's not always priced into the price of the product that goes to market. And so this is what I see sort of as the biggest barrier, especially also to get an investment community willing to invest in something that with the traditional cost analysis that I'm very well familiar with because I taught our students for years how one runs the numbers for a chemical plant. So I'm not naive about it. Yeah. But my concern is that how do you sell to somebody who is in this mindset, who understands how these calculations are done? And they look at this and say, your price per kilo is a little bit higher than what we can do if we go with natural gas as the hydrogen source. And so this is what I consider one of the biggest obstacles. But having said that, I'm very optimistic. And the reason for this is this. I'm actually just looking at something here that you may have seen. This is a cost analysis of the cost of ownership of heavy-duty trucks and the powertrain, the fuel and powertrain cost. And it actually turns out that currently, of course, you cannot compete with a diesel truck. Diesel truck wins. The fuel cell truck is the most expensive. And then the battery truck is sort of somewhere in the middle between a diesel truck and a fuel cell truck at today's cost.
Yeah.
In the year 2050, guess who wins economically? Fuel cell truck.
Fuel cell.
The fuel cell truck beats the cost of ownership of operation of a battery operated truck, according to the IEA. And so these they usually run good numbers, and it's astonishing to see that. So, what this is of course for a very specialized market for heavy duty trucks, and it's based on a range of 500 kilometer, which of course puts the battery truck at a disadvantage because of the range issue. Right?
Yeah, there's, I think it can't be understated what you're talking about, because it's easy to hear this kind of conversation and kind of gloss over it as just another thing. But we're talking about a complete restructuring of world economies, really. You're talking about localized, not just localized energy production, but localized agricultural control. It's now, I love the point that you brought out about farmers being able to produce in some sort of cooperative, customized for their own location, whether it be in Africa or Michigan or California or South America somewhere. It doesn't matter. As long as the sun is shining and you've got wind, you could create these green energy sources that could convert this hydrogen to ammonia, and therefore they have this product flow that's just incredible. And I think if you can imagine what might happen by 2050 if we're able to accomplish this task, it changes everything.
Yes. And of course, then it also brings various technologies together. One of the things I'm currently scratching my head is obviously to do an ammonia synthesis operation. We are fortunate we have invented or come up with an idea that allows us to run this at much lower pressures than the industrial process. But we still need compressors. So how are we powering these compressors? So the thinking, of course, is what if we had instead of conventional compressors, fuel cell based compressors, essentially powering our plant with something like a solid oxide fuel cell, which is not as touchy in terms of hydrogen purity. And so those are various, and then we have essentially this balance of plant issue. We'll still need to store things. We need to time shift because the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. So these are interesting questions. How do you build something like this that does not run 24/7 like an ammonia plant in industry? But now you have something where you have to store your electricity so you can keep running the chemical process 24/7 because you don't want to shut that down. But you can do other things like time shifting. When do you use compressors to bring the pressures up, or when do you store your product, and how do you harvest energy in different ways? So there's some very interesting new concepts of how to operate something like this, sort of away from the traditional paradigm of a 24/7 always on operation. And then, of course, the other interesting thing is once you do that, it opens the door to food security through refrigeration. You can oversize your photovoltaic electric supply system. Now, all of a sudden, you have refrigeration. You can supply the local hospital with electricity for their lights in the operating room. They also can now refrigerate their vaccines, et cetera, et cetera. So this is where I'm going when I was saying we need to really look at the economics in a very different way and not just say, how much does it cost you to make a kilogram of ammonia? That's one thing. But what can we do for this community if we bring this facility in and hybridize it so it does other things besides just providing ammonia? It now also provides refrigeration, it provides lights, it provides communication, maybe by powering electronics in the village, in the community, and so on, right? So we are really looking at but hydrogen is the key ingredient to make this possible.
And you even mentioned it brings jobs to those communities too. You have employment opportunities, and how do you calculate that? There's so many different pieces to this puzzle, but it has to start somewhere, right? It has to start somewhere, and that is with investment in this economy, in this industry, and I really appreciate your positive outlook. I agree with you. I think we have really good things happening. It takes a bigger picture to understand how this could potentially benefit us. Right now, we look at the costs and shudder a little bit. Oh, it's $1 per kilogram for gray hydrogen or blue hydrogen, but for green hydrogen, it's around $5. Well, how do we get that price down? And that's definitely something we're working at New Hydrogen with, and we're experimenting with heat now to figure out how we can potentially create the world's cheapest green hydrogen. And I know you're working on the ammonia solution, so maybe we have a synergy there.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm really grateful for the time you spent with us today. Are there any final thoughts that you had that you wanted to share with anyone about where we're headed? If you could look in your crystal ball and kind of predict the next 3, 5, 10 years, what do you think?
I'm extremely optimistic. And the reason I'm optimistic is I see the next generation of scientists growing up and coming into their own. And I'm awed to see the creativity and also the passion that our young folks have for making the world a better place. And they have a mindset, I think, that makes me extremely hopeful, because if we unleash all these creative minds on the wicked problems that our planet faces, only good things can come from it. And so I think we may look back hopefully in 10, 20 years and say there was just the beginning of the next major breakthrough.
Well, I think they definitely are in good hands with you, and I appreciate all that you do and for your time. It's been great talking with you. Hopefully we'll have a chance to catch up with you again at some point in the future.
Sure.
And have a great day. Thank you so much for
joining. You too, Steve. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk with you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.